Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. I once experienced a strange situation on Halloween. My cousin came to spend the holiday with me that year, just so we could go trick-or-treating together. I was 14 years old at the time, and although I might seem a bit too old for it, let's be honest, who doesn't like free candy? Marcus, my cousin, was also 14, and our plan was simple. Have a relaxed night, visit a few houses, and secure a good amount of candy before heading back home. My friend and his younger brother joined us, but at a certain point, we went our separate ways. The street was quite crowded, with lots of children running from one house to another, all decorated for the occasion. Marcus and I decided to knock on doors of houses that had their lights on, but where there weren't many children around. We had already passed by some houses without decorations that still had people giving out candy. The funny thing was that the other kids were always at the most decorated houses, as if only those were worth visiting. Because of this, we managed to hit about 4 houses really quickly, without any lines. The next house on our list also didn't have decorations, but the lights were on, so we thought, why not try? We knocked on the door, and as soon as it opened, an older man appeared. He threw the door wide open, and inside were 5 other men just standing there. They were much younger than the first one, who must have been in his 50s, while the others appeared to be in their 30s. The man offered us a bowl of candy, took some, and put it in our bags. Then he asked Marcus what his name was. Marcus, being smart, answered with a fake name. Before the man could continue the conversation, Marcus said, "Bye," and we left quickly. As we went down the steps, an alarm sounded in my head. It seemed like Marcus was also feeling uneasy, and we started talking about how bizarre that situation had been. "Why were there 6 men in there when the door opened?" I asked. "And why were they all behaving in such a strange way?" added Marcus. These questions wouldn't leave my mind. We were both scared by how odd the whole thing had been. We visited 2 more houses before deciding to head back to my place. On the way, we took one last look at that strange house and saw a car leaving the garage. The car followed us in the same direction and began to slow down beside us. There weren't many people on the street, and the children were all on the sidewalks, so it didn't make sense for the car to go so slowly near us. We quickened our pace, and then a second car appeared, moving at the same speed as the first one. That's when I realized the driver of the first car was the same guy who had given us the candy, and the driver of the second car was one of the other men who had been standing inside in that suspicious manner. There was also someone in the passenger seat of the first car, but all I could see was the silhouette of this person. When Marcus and I were just 2 houses away from mine, we saw the first car park across the street, right in front of my house. We didn't even have time to see where the second car went. We just ran inside. Our parents were in the living room chatting, and immediately asked what had happened. We told the whole story, and after finishing, we went straight to the window to see if the car was still there. It was, but about 5 seconds after I looked, it drove away. It had probably been parked there for about 5 minutes since we entered. My mom and Marcus's mom wanted us to show them where the house with all those men was. But eventually, our parents calmed us down, saying it must have just been a Halloween prank or something like that. Still, I have my own theory about what happened. I think there were 6 men at the entrance, because when a trick-or-treater appeared alone, or a group of smaller children than us showed up, they planned to rob or kidnap them. But when they saw that Marcus and I were teenagers and the same size as them, they decided to act as if nothing was happening, despite their suspicious behavior. As for why they followed us with their cars, we'll never know. But when the night ended and everyone went to sleep, I realized that house was just a block away from mine. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. This happened many years ago. My old friend Caleb and I were getting ready in our costumes to go trick-or-treating and visit the houses in the neighborhood. We reached the older part of our neighborhood, the one our parents always warned us to avoid since we were just 2 12-year-old kids and didn't know the area very well. We went to the first house there, and a very friendly elderly lady answered, giving us enormous Hershey's chocolate bars. Then, as we were walking toward the second house in that area, a random guy appeared running and screaming in our direction. He came from behind a church building. At first, we thought it was just a Halloween prank, as anyone would think, and we stood there laughing. But when he got closer, he tried to grab the pillowcase full of candy that I was holding. That's when Caleb started hitting him with his own pillowcase. We had collected so many candies, by that point, that the blows must have hurt quite a bit. Caleb didn't stop until the guy let go of the pillowcase and ran off. We thought it was over then, but as we were heading back, we were still completely shocked and confused. I called my mom and asked her to pick us up because we were far from home, and the whole experience had left us wanting to get out of there as quickly as possible. When she arrived to pick us up, we told her everything that had happened, and she could hardly believe it. It seemed so absurd. We got home around 10 at night, and shortly after, we heard a knock at the front door. My dad thought it was just someone late trick-or-treating, so he went to answer. On the other side was a man wearing overalls and a Michael Myers mask. My dad was a bit confused, wondering what he was doing asking for candy alone. From his height and demeanor, it was clear he wasn't a child or teenager. Nevertheless, my dad gave him some candy and didn't think much of it. While Caleb and I were sitting on the couch, we noticed the man was staring at us, as if his mask was pointed directly at us in the living room. It made me a little uncomfortable, and I was hoping he would just leave. My dad ended up closing the door in his face when he realized he wasn't going to leave. It was almost 1 a.m, and we were getting ready to sleep. On the way upstairs, we heard another knock at the door. No way was I going to open the door at that hour, and I knew nothing good would come from someone knocking so late. So I went to my dad and told him about the knock, but he said to just ignore it. Caleb and I went up to my room and turned on a movie. After a while, Caleb heard something and asked me to turn down the volume. When I did, I also heard the sound of leaves being stepped on in the backyard. I looked out the window, and saw the man dressed as Michael Myers swinging on our backyard swing, looking directly at my bedroom window. My heart raced. It felt like it had jumped into my throat. It was as if he was deliberately recreating a scene from a horror movie, just to scare us. I ran to my dad's room and told him the costumed man was on our swing. The look of shock and concern on his face matched ours. He looked out the window, but the man had already disappeared. Just as we were looking, we heard another knock, this time at the back door. My dad went there, but there was no one. That man was clearly playing with us, trying to scare us. It had to be a Halloween prank. Now even my dad seemed worried. Suddenly, we heard my mom scream in the next room. Caleb, my dad, and I ran upstairs, and there was the man dressed as Michael Myers at the foot of the bed, staring at my mom. My dad told Caleb and me to run and call the police. We flew down the stairs and grabbed the nearest phone. I dialed 911 and explained that a man dressed like Michael Myers had broken into our house. The operator asked if everyone was okay. I replied that he was upstairs and my dad was with him, but we needed help urgently. She asked me to stay on the line, saying the police were already on their way. Soon after, we heard from upstairs the sound of my dad shouting, followed by the noise of the sliding window being opened. We ran upstairs and found my parents on the floor. My mom was crying, and my dad's nose was bleeding. He said the man had jumped out the window. When the police arrived, we told them everything that had happened as best we could. They searched the house and yard, which took about 20 minutes. They didn't find anything. I think that was my last year trick-or-treating. And honestly, I think it was for a good reason. To this day, I wonder if the guy who tried to steal my candy that night was the same one wearing the Michael Myers mask. And I really regret not telling the police about that part. My name is Leonard. It was difficult to organize my thoughts to tell everything that happened to me a few years ago, but I feel I need to share it. I've heard strange stories in my life, but none seemed as close to possible as mine. For a long time, I convinced myself that I was delirious or exaggerating, that everything came down to temporary bad luck. Then things went beyond that. I started having nightmares, seeing signs that to this day I can't explain. Even now, I feel like something follows me, and I write not to scare anyone on purpose, but because I can't stand the guilt I carry. I've always been a driver since early on. My late father taught me to drive, and my first real job was at 19 when I got a spot at a small transportation company. We were few in number, and the salary wasn't good, but for me it seemed like the maximum. I grew up in a simple family without much education, so any steady job was a source of pride. I drove small trucks making deliveries to markets and neighborhood stores. Gradually, I started taking longer routes, going back and forth on roads that connected different regions of the country. I liked the idea of traveling, meeting people, seeing different landscapes, but over time that routine started making me tired. The vehicle's air conditioning didn't work properly, and I spent hours in the sun waiting for cargo clearance, facing blockades and potholed roads. I was never one to complain much, but I also never stopped wondering if that was all I could do with my life. But I had no training beyond high school. Driving was what I knew how to do best. When I reached 26, I decided to change a little. I left the transportation company and went to work as a private driver for a small urban delivery service. Basically, I made door-to-door deliveries of products, sometimes urgent documents, other times heavier orders. It wasn't the big turnaround in my life, but it paid better than before. It also left me with more free time, since most deliveries happened at predictable hours. This period lasted about 2 or 3 years, until I went back to wanting longer trips, a feeling I couldn't control. It was then that an acquaintance named Silas appeared to me with an unexpected proposal. He had been my childhood colleague and was involved with passenger transport, but nothing official. He had a van, and from what I knew, he used to make chartered trips for tourists, small excursions. I hadn't seen him in years. One day we ran into each other at a corner near my work. He got out of the van with a huge smile and greeted me. "Hey Leonard, how long has it been? You're in the usual rush." I briefly told him about my delivery job, which was honest but had no future. He nodded and said he was working on his own, that sometimes the money was very good, sometimes not so much, but that he had some interesting contacts. We talked little, and before saying goodbye, he threw out, "I have a scheme that might interest you. If you ever want to listen, call me. I'll need trustworthy people." I was curious, but didn't ask anything at the time. The work rush didn't give me a break. Days later, I texted him, wanting to better understand this proposal. He responded quickly saying we could talk in person, if I was up for having coffee on the weekend. We arranged to meet at a simple establishment in a truck transit area. I arrived at the agreed time, and there, he was with the same friendly smile, but bringing a somewhat mysterious posture. We sat down, ordered coffee and toast. He started saying he had a foreign contact who needed drivers to take special passengers from one point to another, always at night or early morning. He spoke as if it were something super normal, but I already found it different. Even so, I didn't want to rush. It's a job without much complication. You just need to go to the location, get the van or car that will already be ready, and head to the destination they give you. The pay is very good, and there's no risk because everything is settled with the authorities. You can rest assured. When he mentioned authorities, my stomach churned. I asked why everything had to be at night. He gave a short laugh and replied, "They're people who don't like to appear, but it's not a crime or anything. The guy who organizes this has documentation for everything. It's just that it can't be done in the middle of the day. You understand? We need discretion." That didn't sound very convincing, but he insisted, saying that if I were smart, I would take advantage of the opportunity. Almost double salary compared to what I received, and I wouldn't need to work every day. Basically, I just had to be on standby. When they called, I would show up and complete the route. Simple like that. I said I would think about it, but the truth is I wasn't very comfortable. On the other hand, my family and I always had some financial struggles, and it was tempting to imagine finally having some money left over. Maybe save up to buy my own car, or make a down payment on a house. I thought it wouldn't hurt to try one trip, see how it was in practice. Several weeks passed without him looking for me. I almost forgot about it. I was sure he had found another driver. But on a Friday night, I was watching television when Silas sent a message. "Hey, are you free tomorrow? There might be an opportunity for you to feel the vibe." I replied yes without much certainty, but accepting. He guided me to go to a specific point in the early afternoon, far from downtown, near a stretch of little trafficked road. He said I would see a van parked with the key in the ignition. He said it would just be a document delivery and some passengers. Nothing big. I confess I felt a chill, but tried to stay calm. Maybe it was just off-the-radar transport, people who don't want to pay bus fare, I don't know. On Saturday, I left home after lunch and followed the coordinates he gave. Indeed, I found a van parked in a corner with somewhat dark windows. There was no one around. I stopped my car, got out, looked for someone who could give me instructions. Nothing. I went to the van and confirmed it was unlocked and with the key in the ignition. I found a sealed envelope on top of the driver's seat. I opened it out of curiosity and saw a paper with the destination address. The text said only, "Take to Community X, wait for person with envelope, follow to address, and return at dawn." There wasn't even a name of who would enter or any indication of how many passengers. That made me nervous, but I thought it was part of the scheme. With the route in hand, I called the van. It had gas, new tires, everything in order. I drove for a stretch of dirt road, then took a main road I already knew. There wasn't much traffic. I was used to traveling, so it wasn't anything complicated. I arrived at the indicated place around 11:30 at night, a somewhat remote area with few lights. I stayed there waiting. After about 15 minutes, a young woman appeared with a very haggard face, holding a sleeping child in her arms. The van had 7 seats, but only she got in. She didn't even introduce herself, just settled into the back seat with the baby sleeping in her lap. It was a strange scene because she had no luggage, no coat, and the night was cold. She spoke softly, almost whispering, and said something like, "He told me you would come." I nodded, still not knowing who he was. She handed me a little paper with another address. No small talk, just following the trip. The road was deserted, and the only thing you could hear was the engine hum and the somewhat muffled cry of the baby, who woke up at some point. From time to time, I tried to make conversation, ask if she was okay, but she responded with monosyllables. She seemed nervous or tired. We arrived at a region of small farms around 2 in the morning. She asked me to stop in front of a wooden gate. There was no sign or walls, just a simple house in the back. She got out, thanked me with an almost inaudible voice, and went walking, carefully holding the baby. I stayed there not knowing if I should wait for someone. I thought someone would appear to take the van, but nothing happened. Then I took my cell phone and wrote to Silas. "I've arrived at the address. What do I do now?" He just sent, "You can go home. I'll pay you later." I felt a little foolish. I drove back, left the van where I got it, and went home with my car. I found everything very strange, but nothing violent or illegal had happened, right? Maybe it was some clandestine social assistance program, or some family that couldn't pay for transport. Still, there was an unpleasant atmosphere. I can't explain it. The young woman's face, the scared way, the baby crying as if it wanted to get out of there. Something left me anguished. In the following days, Silas gave me part of the agreed payment. It wasn't an absurd amount, but it exceeded what I would earn in a week of normal service. I asked if there would be more trips, and he said yes, but without giving dates. He also said the foreigner was very satisfied because I had been punctual and discreet. I ended up falling into a strange rhythm. During the day, I continued with my delivery job, and from time to time, I received a message calling for more of these suspicious transports. Always the same way. A van waiting for me at a remote location, the route in an envelope, and at the end some woman got in, sometimes with a child, sometimes pregnant. They never talked much. Some cried, others stayed silent. All with that expression of people who had no choice. I didn't ask too much, but my conscience was already starting to weigh. After a few months, I decided to quit the deliveries and dedicate myself exclusively to these transports. Yes, I know it sounds absurd, but the money was coming in, and I was starting to plan to buy a little house. When I realized it, I was trapped by easy money, convincing myself that even if there was something strange, it wasn't necessarily illegal. After all, no one complained, no one asked for help. It could be an immigration program, or people wanting to stay away from the spotlight. They always told me everything was settled with the authorities. However, the feeling of getting involved in an obscure plot wouldn't stop growing, especially when I started noticing a pattern. The passengers were almost always very humble. Some barely spoke English. They seemed to come from remote regions of the deep interior. Furthermore, almost all were in situations of vulnerability. Pregnant, carrying babies, without relatives nearby, almost without luggage. At the end, we arrived at an isolated point, usually at dawn, and someone received them. Sometimes a blonde woman appeared, very white, who spoke broken English. Other times, two men dressed in lab coats appeared, as if they were doctors. And then I was sent away without ceremony. I started questioning Silas, wanting to understand what this story was about doctors and clandestine routes. He limited himself to answering, "Each one does their part and gets paid for it. Don't think too much or you'll go crazy. If it were something dangerous, we would have seen police on our tail by now." I tried to calm myself with this idea, but I couldn't. The suspicion was eating me up. In one of these trips, I picked up a father with a boy about 4 years old. It was the first time I transported a man. He got in the van with the boy in his lap. The boy was shaking, had a fever, and the father said he was going to take him to a big hospital in the capital. He spoke with a lot of hope, as if he were finally going to get free treatment. He also said, "The people from this project promised me they would take care of him, pay for surgery, medicine, everything. God bless whoever does this." My throat locked up because it sounded too good. I stayed quiet, but doubt was suffocating me. If it were a humanitarian program, why was there no official publicity? Why nothing in the newspapers, on the radio? Why everything in that disturbing discretion? The worst was when months later, I saw a post on the internet about the disappearance of a boy and his father. The photo was old, but I recognized the boy's face. There was no way it could be a coincidence. In the news, the mother said they had been convinced to travel for a supposed medical opportunity, and then never returned. I felt like someone punched me in the stomach. I started sweating cold and had to close the browser. I spent hours sitting, mentally reviewing everything I had done. I knew I couldn't simply abandon the function. I was afraid that if I abruptly walked away, this foreigner or whoever was responsible would come after me. After all, I had too much information. I knew the routes, the vehicles, part of the scheme. At the same time, I didn't want to continue taking people to an uncertain destination. Every kilometer squeezed my chest, made me sweat. Sleep became a daily nightmare. It was no use praying, trying to watch light things on TV, or listening to relaxing music. The guilt wouldn't leave. The nightmares started subtly. In some, I drove alone on an endless road, without a sign or any reference. I knew I needed to get somewhere, but I didn't know where. The van was empty, but I felt a breath that wasn't mine. I woke up with my heart racing, but tried to convince myself it was just stress. Then things got more intense. Trips where I transported several sick people, all with faces turned to silence in a corner. Sometimes I saw a figure, a long, thin figure that watched me. I couldn't describe it very well. It just caused me inexplicable terror. One early morning, coming back from one of these deliveries, I stopped at a gas station to go to the bathroom and have coffee. The attendant was kind of sleepy, the place empty. I went into the bathroom, washed my face, and when I raised my head, I had the impression of seeing someone standing right behind me in the mirror. I was startled and immediately turned my body. There was nothing. I was left with my heart in my mouth, thinking if I was going crazy. I went back to the van, trying to calm down. I drove another 20 minutes, dying to get home. Then out of nowhere, I heard a baby crying coming from the back seat. I looked in the rearview mirror, and there was no one. The crying continued for several seconds, a painful cry, as if the child was in pain. Then it disappeared, leaving a strange silence. I was so nervous that I stopped the vehicle on the shoulder. I got out and opened the rear door. Nothing, no sign of a child. Not knowing what to do, I prayed quietly and got back behind the wheel. From that day on, I never drove at dawn again without the feeling of being watched by something I couldn't see. I told Silas I was having some sleep problems, but I didn't go into details. He just recommended that I take a few days off, that I relax and everything would pass. I said I preferred to stay without taking work for a while. He was surprised, asked if I owed something, or if someone had threatened me. I replied no, but that I needed to take care of my health. He hesitated, but ended up accepting. He said he would talk to the people and leave me on standby if something urgent came up. I thanked him and walked away for a few weeks. I stayed home trying to resume my normal life, but I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of people getting into the van, of sick babies, of scared faces came. Sometimes I had dreams where I saw a room full of incubators with newborns crying, and in the background that thin figure with legs that looked like an animal's. It was strange. I didn't see horns, I didn't see something so clear, but the shape reminded me of a large animal, curved, with long arms. It seemed to emit a low sound, almost like a grunt. I tried to convince myself it was just a symbol of my remorse. After all, I had no proof of anything, just suppositions. But the news of that father and son who disappeared wouldn't leave my head. I also remembered a young woman I picked up once, carrying a baby so small it barely had the strength to cry. She said the child needed special medicine. In the middle of the journey, we exchanged a few words. She asked me if I had ever seen any big hospital nearby. I replied that I didn't know. I was just following instructions. She smiled and said, "I think they're going to take care of me and him. I never had anything in life, so I believe now it's going to work out." Her naivety broke my heart. One night, I woke up feeling a presence in the room. I was sweating with shortness of breath. I felt a strange smell, something like wet fur or old leather. I opened my eyes, and in the dimness, I thought I saw a figure near the corner of the room. I froze. I thought about turning on the bedside lamp, but I was afraid that by doing so, I would see something indescribable. I don't know how long I stayed paralyzed, but I ended up overcome by tiredness and slept again. In the morning, I found the lamp knocked over, without remembering having bumped into it. I spent the day quiet. At this point, I was already thinking about going to the police, but I had no concrete evidence. I could only tell what I thought, that there was a group transporting vulnerable people, that these people disappeared afterwards. I still couldn't point names or knew where they actually went. And to make matters worse, Silas said the police were in the foreigner's pocket. I would probably risk myself for nothing. Even so, my conscience told me to do something. I was in this dilemma, and meanwhile I didn't accept any more trips. I told Silas I was sick, invented health problems. He said he understood, but I noticed he became distant from me. I started surviving on the savings I had gathered and doing odd jobs, driving for people I knew. But the feeling that something was chasing me only grew. I started seeing figures always out of the corner of my eye, especially at dawn. Sometimes I heard low voices, as if they were talking inside my house. Once I clearly heard a child crying, but it was morning with the sun coming through the window. I couldn't explain it. I checked the whole house, looked under the bed, behind doors in the yard. Nothing. One late afternoon, I decided to visit a friend who lived on the other side of town. I wanted to distract myself, talk about football, anything to forget the paranoia. On the way, I passed a street where there were some missing person posters glued to poles. I don't usually notice much, but something caught my attention. One of the photos was of a pregnant woman. Below it read something like, "If anyone has seen her, please call this number." I stopped the car to look closer. I recognized her. I was sure it was one of the passengers I took maybe 3 or 4 months ago. She even wore the same colorful scarf in her hair. The poster said she was a resident of a simple neighborhood and had disappeared without a trace. A deep sadness hit me. I went to my friend's house, but couldn't talk properly about anything. I just said I wasn't feeling well and left. The nightmares returned with more force. Now, besides seeing that long figure, I heard a sound of hooves hitting the ground, as if an animal was walking in circles around me. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart out of rhythm. I took water, tried to pray quietly. I was angry at myself because I didn't know if it was just a simple manifestation of stress or something actually supernatural that haunted me, associated with what I had done. On another occasion, I was urgently called by Silas. He said he really needed me, that one of the drivers was absent, and the foreigner was furious. I resisted, but in the end gave in. I needed money, and also feared they would become suspicious of me. I arranged everything, and that night, I went to the designated location. When I got into the van, I noticed there were two men sitting in the back seats. One of them was Brazilian by his accent, and the other spoke English with a slight different accent, maybe European. They weren't violent, but looked at me seriously. The Brazilian said, "Take us to that point we informed you about. There's some people will get into the van. Then we follow to the final place." I nodded in agreement. We didn't exchange any more words. We arrived at a road without lighting, with dense vegetation on both sides. We stopped near a kind of dirt entrance. Shortly after, 3 women appeared, all with pregnant bellies. They didn't come together, but arrived almost at the same time, as if they were being guided by someone I didn't see. 2 barely spoke. The third, a little older, walked slowly, apparently in back pain. They got into the van without saying anything. One of the men gestured for them to sit in the back. The older one whispered something to him, which he replied in a low voice, but I didn't understand. I stayed a few seconds, stopped with the key in my hand, thinking if I should start and run away from there. But I realized it would be crazy. So I started the engine and followed the route. The women whispered something I didn't understand. At one point, one of the pregnant women asked the other, "Are you sure they won't deceive us?" The answer was, "I have faith that everything will work out. They said this doctor is trustworthy, that he'll arrange work after the birth." I closed my eyes for a second, trying to ignore the remorse. That conversation confirmed that they believed in the chance of having their babies well cared for and still getting work. It sounded too good. I couldn't believe it. After a lot of road, we arrived at a property hidden behind a high gate. One of the men told me to stop there. He got out, opened the gate, and the van entered slowly. From afar, I saw a large house, but few lights on. There was a tense climate, as if no one wanted to draw attention. The pregnant women got out accompanied by the 2 men. I stayed at the wheel. I waited about 10 minutes. No one came back. At that point, despair started hitting me. I was afraid something horrible would happen in there. I only heard some noises coming from inside the house, maybe muffled voices. I had the urge to get out and check, but I restrained myself. I didn't want to interfere and end up dead in a corner or disappear, without a trace like so many others. After this time, the Brazilian man came back alone and said, "You can go. Tomorrow someone will pick up the van. If you want a ride, the other driver is outside with a car." I declined, saying I had my car at another point and preferred to take a taxi. He didn't question it. I left shaking. I walked back to a relatively nearby gas station and called a taxi. I spent the entire trip quiet, looking out the window, feeling a suffocating certainty that I had participated in something monstrous. When I got home, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the sofa until dawn. In the morning, I started having a fever. I couldn't eat anything, just drank water and felt nauseous. It seemed like my body was reacting to all that, as if it was saying, "Enough." I stayed in bed for 2 days, lacking strength even to answer the cell phone. Silas called several times, but I ignored him. I didn't want to know about anything else. When I recovered, I tried to get a normal job, but I was listless. Not a day went by without thinking about the people I took. And as if that weren't enough, the visions and nightmares intensified. Almost every night, I woke up sweating with the impression that someone was walking through the hallway of the house. I even started locking the internal doors, but it didn't help. The atmosphere was heavy, as if the air had become dense. One early morning, I heard noises in the yard, as if something was scraping the wall. I opened the window, and in the little clarity, I thought I saw a crouched silhouette of tall stature that disappeared behind the wall. I felt a chill and immediately closed the window, sweating. I started using mild tranquilizers to be able to sleep, but the dreams continued. I dreamed of missing people, of children crying for their mothers, and in many dreams that figure returned, the entity that moved like a predator. It was never complete, but sometimes I distinguished long arms and legs that seemed deformed. It seemed to emit a grunt, as if it were a large animal. I woke up screaming and took a while to understand where I was. At a certain point, I decided I needed to put an end to it. I thought about moving to another place, disappearing and starting life over. But I didn't have enough money to support myself in another city for a long time. And there was still the fear that if I disappeared, they could find me. When you get involved in a scheme like this, it's not so simple to turn your back. A few days later, Silas appeared at my door without warning. My girlfriend at the time was scared because he had a serious look. I invited him in and he was short and direct. "Look, the people want to know why you don't answer anymore. Some people think you might be talking too much around there." I tried to explain myself. I said I was sick, having problems, wasn't in condition to work or do anything. He sighed. "Okay, I just hope you're being sincere. If I find out you want to tell stories to someone, it gets complicated." That sounded like a threat. He said he would come by later to leave me some money from an old trip and left. My girlfriend asked me what was happening. I told her part of the truth, saying I worked with suspicious people and was now trying to get out without getting more involved. She was worried, but at the same time supported me. She said we should be careful. As the weeks passed, Silas stopped contacting me, and I hoped they would forget me. Meanwhile, the strange experiences persisted. I even saw that creature more clearly in the middle of a nightmare that seemed real. I was in a place full of dry trees and twisted trunks. There was no sound of insects or wind. Then on the horizon, a dark silhouette appeared. The nightmare was so intense that I felt the smell of damp earth. That thing approached, and when it was close, it seemed to me an erect being with legs resembling the paws of some animal. But the torso was almost human. I didn't see a human face, but I noticed eyes that shone as if they reflected light. I woke up screaming with my chest hurting from so much terror. I tried to find strength to report the scheme, but I didn't have an ounce of courage to enter a police station and expose that. I was scared of the possibility of the police being involved, or of being branded as crazy. I had already heard rumors that the group had support from important people. My girlfriend advised me to at least anonymously warn people about these false promises of work and medical treatment. So I started browsing social networks, groups, and forums trying to alert. I used a fake profile without a photo, but my posts didn't have much reach, and some were taken down. People commented saying I was making up conspiracies. That discouraged me even more. One night I had a terrifying dream. I saw a room that looked like a warehouse. There were stretchers lined up, and on each stretcher a pregnant woman. Some crying, others seeming drugged. In the back, men in lab coats handled surgical tools and notes. Everything was illuminated by white lamps, and in the corners that being with abnormal legs, staring at each person. I tried to scream, but no voice came out. I woke up crying with the feeling of having witnessed a bizarre ritual. It wasn't just trafficking or baby selling. It seemed like a sacrifice or something worse, as if that monstrous thing was there to ensure everything went the way they planned. For a while I thought I was losing my sanity. I talked to my girlfriend, now my wife, and she tried to calm me down, but she also started having nightmares. Dreams involving babies crying, women asking for help. It seemed like the bad energy from my life had contaminated the whole house. She encouraged me to seek spiritual help in some church, but I was afraid to talk about the subject with anyone. I was afraid of both physical and supernatural retaliation. She even tried once to talk discreetly with a priest to schedule a confession. But that same night, she suddenly became ill with vomiting and high fever. We were scared as if something was saying, "Don't interfere." I lived anguished. To make matters worse, I couldn't get a stable job, and our bills started to be late. The money I had saved was running out. In the midst of this crisis, I received a visit from a man who claimed to be Silas's friend. I don't remember his name, but he had a serious way, wearing a tie, speaking quietly. He appeared at my door saying he knew about my financial situation, and that if I wanted to go back to driving, the people could accept me back. I, scared to death, said no because I was sick. He smiled sideways and said I should reconsider before running out of money. He didn't make an explicit threat, but the insinuation was clear. This almost made me give in, but the fear of what I knew overcame the need for money. I rejected the offer, and he left without insisting. 2 days later, my car broke down, and the shop charged dearly for the repair. I was left owing the mechanic, unable to pay in cash. The view was as if all kinds of problems came at the same time, pressuring me to go back to work for that scheme. In the midst of this, I started having not only nightmares, but also strangely lucid dreams where I saw children crying on the side of a road. I tried to approach, but something prevented me. Suddenly, a huge shadow would appear behind them, and I would hear a crack, as if it were a branch breaking. When I tried to run, my legs wouldn't move. I always woke up with my body sweaty, my heart accelerated. I was in a constant state of exhaustion. One of the times I felt most terrified was when, returning from the market, I stopped the car in the garage, and when I turned off the engine, I felt a weight in the back seat, as if someone had sat down. I didn't hear a door noise or anything. I turned slowly to look. There was no one, but the seat seemed slightly sunken, as if an invisible body was there. I lost the courage to check closely. I simply opened the driver's door and ran into the house. My wife, seeing my state, asked me several times what had happened, but I could only shake my head. I spent the rest of the night praying, asking for forgiveness for any harm I might have caused. One late afternoon, I decided to take a car ride through a more remote region. in an attempt to clear my head. I took a dirt road that passed near some farms. I drove slowly, observing the field. I even stopped under a tree to breathe and drink some water. That's when I noticed a poster attached to an improvised post made of wood. It talked about a family that had completely disappeared. Father, mother, and 2 children. The person who wrote it begged for any information, left a phone number and an emotional appeal. I felt my body shudder because from the description, they could have been targets of those people. It seemed like every day that passed, I found more evidence that the people I transported never came back. That broke me completely. When night fell, I decided to withdraw. I stopped at a small roadside bar to eat something. While I had some broth, I started paying attention to the voices around me. 2 gentlemen were talking about ghost stories and creatures that appeared to hunters. One of them mentioned something like, "There are people who swear they saw a big animal with strange paws that wanders these paths at night. They say that where it passes, people disappear." My heart jumped. He could be talking about any local legend. But to me, it sounded very close to what I had seen in dreams. I preferred to pay the bill and leave. Even with all this fear, I tried to follow life. I worked as an app driver for a while, making short trips. I thought I would manage to breathe. But one night, I was at home taking a shower when I heard my wife scream. I got out of the shower running, still wet, and found her in the living room, pale, pointing to the window. She said she saw a strange thing outside, something moving in a way that wasn't normal at all. I ran to the window, but didn't see anything. Even so, she was trembling. We spent the rest of the night awake, with the feeling that something was circling our house. After that, she begged me for us to take some time away from the city, visit a distant relative, or rent something in a quiet place for a few weeks. I decided to accept. We gathered what we could and left on a Friday afternoon, hoping to forget everything. But it seems the further I got away, the more the memories came to the surface. On the road, something happened that almost made me stop the car completely. A strange animal crossed in front of me that looked like a deer, but moved slowly and stared at me fixedly. I was so disturbed that I braked to avoid hitting it. It stood there for a few moments, then walked away without hurry, staring at me with eyes that seemed human. My wife grabbed my arm, noticing my panic. We looked at each other and she whispered, "Just go past it." I stepped on the accelerator, swerving around the animal that didn't run, just continued on the side of the road. It was impossible not to remember the images from my dream. That hybrid creature. That scene accompanied me the rest of the way. We spent almost a week at that retreat, but I had no peace. Agitated dreams, strange sensations. My wife even stopped commenting so as not to make me more nervous, but it was visible that she couldn't sleep either. When we returned, it seemed the house was even colder, more silent. I had the impression of seeing scratch marks on one of the exterior walls, as if claws had been driven there. I was sweating, but decided not to comment so as not to scare my wife even more. The routine continued, and I avoided talking to Silas or anyone else from the past. But now and then I dreamed that he was looking for me, saying I needed to conclude the story, as if there was a pending debt of mine with that group. One day I received a phone call from an unknown number. I answered, and the voice on the other side was from a woman who introduced herself as an assistant to the foreign contractor. She started by saying she regretted my withdrawal, but that there was an important delivery, and they needed me specifically. My first reaction was to stutter, saying I wasn't in condition to drive. She ignored it and continued, "Don't do this disservice. We all know you have a debt of gratitude for the months you worked with us. Just one more trip and I promise we'll release you." My throat went dry. I don't know why she spoke that way. It seemed like blackmail. She said she would send me an address and that I should show up that night without delay. Before I could respond, she hung up. I was paralyzed with the phone in my hand. I didn't want to go, but what if they came after me? I talked to my wife. She was terrified, told me to run away. But where to? And I also feared for what they would do to her or my family members. In the end, I made the decision to go, but with the idea of observing everything, seeing if I could get some kind of proof or information to report later. I was already exhausted from that life of fear. When the time came, I got in the car and headed to the address. It was a house with high walls, iron gate, in an area without movement. I honked the horn, and after a few moments, a man came to receive me, saying I needed to get the van inside. I went in, parked, and saw the van leaning against the garage. They handed me the keys and a paper with instructions. Pick up 2 women at a road point and then take them to a specific location. I asked who these women were, and the man made a disdainful face. "It doesn't matter. Do what you always did, and everything will be fine." I felt anger inside, but restrained myself. I started the van and left. I drove for almost an hour to the road. Everything dark, few lights on the posts. I stopped, turned off the engine, and waited. A cold wind was blowing, and I had the feeling that any movement in the woods could be an animal or someone spying on me. Suddenly 2 young women appeared, one of them with a huge pregnant belly, the other carrying a small baby wrapped in cloth. They seemed scared, looking around. They got into the van without saying anything, just greeted each other with a shy nod. As soon as I closed the door, I noticed the woman with the baby had a somewhat recent cut on her eyebrow, and she was trying to hide it. I followed the route. From time to time, the pregnant woman moaned low, maybe feeling pain. I tried to ask if everything was okay, but they didn't answer anything, just looked at me with frightened eyes. After about 40 minutes, we stopped at a land surrounded by barbed wire. The door was open at the front, as if waiting for our arrival. I lit it with the headlight and saw a rustic construction in the back. A blonde-haired woman appeared wearing white clothes. She signaled for me to enter with the van. The pregnant woman whispered, "Are you sure everything will be fine?" "I don't see any doctor." The blonde replied in English marked by an accent, "Trust me, come on." I was so anguished I could barely turn off the engine properly. That's when I noticed a dark stain on the ground near the entrance. It looked like dried blood. My heart raced. The young women didn't notice. They were distracted by the blonde woman. I opened the door, took a step out, and heard a muffled scream from inside the house. I don't know if it was human or an animal, but it sounded desperate. I wanted to run away, but froze in place. The blonde raised her voice, "Close that gate now." I went to the gate hesitantly. I thought about running away, but my legs were wobbly. When I returned, The two young women had already gone inside. The blonde stared at me and said firmly, "Wait here. We're going to solve something and we'll release you soon." I nodded without speaking. She went into the house. I was alone, looking around. The wind swayed dry vegetation, and I heard night birds, but nothing that calmed me. After about 10 minutes, the same blonde woman came back alone. "Leave the van there. You're coming with me." I said I preferred to stay in the van, but she gave me a look that intimidated me. Without choice, I followed her. She took me through a narrow corridor, where one of the environments had a heavy curtain. You could hear babies crying from there. I felt terror spread through my body. At the end of the corridor, there was a dark room that stank of something chemical, like strong medicine or industrial cleaning product. The blonde opened the door and said, "Go in here. I'll be back to release you." "Don't worry." I went in, kind of not knowing what to do. It was a small room with 2 chairs and a table. The door closed. I stayed there taking deep breaths, trying to find courage to escape. I tried to open it, but the door was locked from outside. I knocked and called without response. I felt like a trapped rat. I stayed there inside for who knows how long. It could have been 30 minutes or 2 hours. Through the crack under the door, I saw the corridor light turn on and off from time to time. I heard voices, hurried steps. At a certain moment, I think I dozed off from exhaustion. I dreamed that creature with a half-animal body entered the room and observed me. I woke up with a start. My heart accelerated. I got up and kept knocking on the door again, calling. Finally, someone turned the key. Who appeared was a tall man wearing glasses, dressed in a lab coat. He stared at me with indifference. "The boss said you can leave. If you want transport, there's a car outside." I asked about the 2 young women. He let out a humorless laugh. "That's none of your business. Go and don't open your mouth about what you saw or heard." I tried to say something else, but he raised his hand and gestured for me to leave. I obeyed. I went back to the patio and indeed found a running car, a young man at the wheel calling me. "Get in there, I'll drop you off on the road." I got in, still confused. He took me to a highway, leaving me at a deserted bus stop. "Good luck," he said before starting off. I was alone in the dark, trembling. I ended up getting a ride with a truck driver who was passing by, who left me near home. I arrived at dawn with my body tense, my head throbbing. I told my wife everything. She was shocked. We cried together, no longer knowing what to do. After that episode, they never called me for anything again. Sila's disappeared. The foreign assistant didn't call anymore. It was as if I had been dismissed, or as if they had tested me and concluded I wouldn't serve anymore. On one hand, I felt relieved not to have to participate. On the other, the nightly terror intensified. It was as if the creature, or whatever it was, had marked me. I started seeing out of the corner of my eye a large shadow with thin legs, sometimes in the corners of the hallway or in the back of the garage. Whenever I looked directly, it disappeared. The same strange smell of fur or old leather appeared at the most random moments. My wife also said she felt something but avoided commenting. I discovered, talking discreetly with acquaintances, that some disappearance reports were popping up in different places. Pregnant women, small children, and sometimes entire families. Few cases reached the media. Usually, they only came out as small notes. This silence made me believe there was money behind it, muffling everything. And I didn't have the courage to knock on a newspaper's door and tell my story. I was terrified of reprisals. So my life went on. I managed to get a steady job as a driver at a moving company sometime later, without major roots, and I tried to move forward with life. But even now, years later, I still dream about those people. In some dreams, I see faces I recognize from past trips, all staring at me as if they wanted to ask me why I didn't do anything to save them. I see images of babies left in cold rooms with wires and tubes. I hear cries that seem like calls for help. The vision of that half-animal, half-man being remains with me to this day. On some nights, I have the impression of feeling its gaze in some dark corner. I avoid being alone on the street after a certain time. I could never drive at dawn again without remembering these facts. Whenever I see any van circulating, I feel a chill thinking it might be another clandestine transport taking innocent people toward the unknown. I've thought about reporting everything to the authorities, but there's no way to prove anything. I only have my testimony, and I know they must have connections to discredit me. Besides, that presence that torments me in dreams gives me the feeling that speaking would break a silent pact. It's as if it's engraved in my head that if I told everything openly, I would pay dearly or end up taking my wife along in the damage. I know it seems like cowardice, but I don't wish for anyone to suffer this type of invisible persecution. Time passed, and I tried to rebuild my life. I got married, had some health problems but recovered. I moved neighborhoods, sought to keep distance from anyone who could link me to that scheme. However, I can't be at peace. From time to time, I hear some comment about people who disappeared, and my heart races. I wonder if they're still transporting women, children. I blame myself for having participated, even without realizing the gravity at the beginning. When I try to explain my anguish to someone without giving too many details, the person thinks it's paranoia or delirium. That's why I decided to report everything in writing. It's my way of venting and maybe alerting someone. It could be that reading this, someone will rethink these miraculous proposals for medical treatment or jobs abroad for pregnant women. Because many times there's nothing good behind it, just darkness. I know my story is strange, but I guarantee I have no reason to make it up. There are days when I dream I'm in an empty room, and that creature enters, surrounds me, looks at me for a while, then simply disappears. I wake up with my body aching, sweaty, feeling a fear that no word describes. Maybe it's just guilt and remorse punishing me. Or maybe there's something real we don't know that feeds on the suffering of these people. I can't say. It's scary to think about how many people were deceived and taken to unknown places, possibly without return. Maybe these people were used in rituals, maybe sold, or who knows what. Anyway, every time I see news of missing people, I feel like I carry part of this tragedy on my shoulders. And when I try to pray, I feel a weight as if I'm being watched and warned not to meddle in this matter anymore. I told this account so other people stay alert. Unfortunately, I can't change what I did. I can only live with the fact that I was an accomplice, even if through ignorance. And if they ask me if I believe in something supernatural today, I would say I believe. I don't know how it works, but I feel there are negative forces that manifest when human evil reaches a certain level. Maybe that's the closest explanation I have for the apparitions that torment me. I continue living, working, but always with the feeling that there's a gaze over my shoulder. This is my account. Probably many won't believe it. Some will think I'm exaggerating or making up horror stories. But I know that for me everything was and is too real. Each night trip I made, each face that passed through the van, each sleepless night. This transformed me in a way I can't reverse. I write to try to purge some of the guilt, but I don't know if it will help. If one day you come across a strangely good offer that only asks for your discretion, remember what I told you here. Prefer misery to darkness without return. What I'm about to tell you happened when I was 16 years old. I'm 25 now, and I'll try to recount this story as accurately as possible. It was Halloween night in my small town in northern Alabama. The evening was humid and sticky, with temperatures hovering around 85 degrees. The oppressive heat seemed relentless, even after sunset. I was walking with my older sister and our friend Jessica. My sister had dressed as a black cat, and Jessica wore a classic witch costume. I, on the other hand, had made the terrible decision to wear a long formal gown, having chosen to go as a zombie prom queen. I even wore a plastic tiara and everything. I felt suffocated in that dress. It was so hot, and the corset back made it difficult to breathe properly. It was nearly 9 o'clock, and most of the trick-or-treaters had disappeared from the streets. We were heading to the town square near City Hall, where my mom was supposed to pick us up. The plan was to meet her there at 9 sharp. At that point, we were about 6 blocks away. My sister stopped to chat with a friend she recognized. I kept walking ahead. I was already running late for meeting my mom. And besides, I was completely uncomfortable in that horrible dress. All I could think about was getting home. I continued walking for 2 more blocks until I realized my sister and Jessica had fallen far behind. I was annoyed, but only 4 blocks remained until I could collapse into the bench seat of my mom's minivan. I started to feel uneasy being alone in the darkness. The yellow streetlights only made the atmosphere more ominous. I kept a steady pace until I heard the rumble of an engine behind me. I immediately stepped off the road. A massive black pickup truck roared past and turned left-right in front of me. I crossed the intersection, only 3 blocks to go. Then I heard that truck again. I was still off the main road, so I didn't bother looking back. This time it didn't seem so strange that the same truck had passed by again. But on the 3rd time, they slowed down for a good 30 seconds. That terrified me. I didn't recognize the truck, and the windows were too dark to see who was inside. When I thought I caught a glimpse of part of a face, they accelerated and disappeared around the corner. I walked another block before hearing the truck's engine again. Now only 2 blocks remained until the spot where my mom would pick me up. Fear consumed me, and I began to run. I could barely breathe properly because of the dress, and I was terrified of fainting. As soon as the engine's rumble appeared again, my stomach churned. I kept walking, but picked up the pace considerably. I kept my eyes fixed on the ground, watching my own shadow as the headlights approached. When I heard the brakes, I tried to run, but it was too late. I realized how close they were to me. I felt a sharp pain in the back of my head. When I looked up, I saw an arm extending from the window. On his forearm was a tattoo of an eagle clutching a sword. He had my hair gripped in his fist. But before I could understand what was happening, he accelerated, dragging me alongside the truck. I ran as fast as I could, trying to scratch his arm. I cried and screamed. All I could think was that if I tripped, I'd be run over. The man was laughing, and I was completely helpless. Just as suddenly as it began, he released me. I fell to my knees on the asphalt, tearing the dress and scraping the palms of my hands. My scalp felt like it was on fire. I was completely desperate and could barely breathe. I got up, wiped my face, and looked around. I felt totally violated. When I looked back and realized I had been dragged by my hair for more than a full block, the shock only intensified. As soon as I regained minimal control, I ran to the other side of the street toward the town square. My mom was nowhere to be found. I climbed into the enclosed slide at the playground and curled up inside, crying uncontrollably. I have no idea how long I stayed there until I heard my mom calling my name. I climbed down and saw her walking up the street, shouting my name. I walked toward her. When she saw me, her eyes widened and she panicked. Apparently, I had blood on my face and dress from the cuts on my hands. She ran to me, asking what had happened, trying to find any more serious injuries. I couldn't speak. I just hugged her and cried. We spent the following hours at the police station, filing a report. In the end, nothing came of it. My sister got in trouble with my parents for not being at City Hall on time and ended up grounded. My mom had left City Hall to look for us, and when she found my sister, she hadn't even noticed I was no longer there. I also got scolded for not staying with my sister, but at least I wasn't punished. I still get very irritated remembering that my dress was destroyed, that I lost my crown, and even more so because that man was never found. This Halloween, I'm going trick-or-treating with my goddaughter. It'll be the first time in many years since all of this happened. First, I need to say that I'm one of those quiet readers who just observes around here. I've been lurking for some time and only recently created an account to follow stories that caught my attention. Honestly, I never imagined I'd have something to share. Actually, I'd prefer not to have anything to tell. I would have been perfectly content to continue just reading. But anyway, let me start with a little about myself. This October, I'm working at one of those haunted attractions, a haunted corn maze in rural Michigan. The pay isn't much, just minimum wage, but it helps me make some extra money for college expenses. The place is a combination corn maze and haunted house. I'm not one of the people who jump out wearing bloody masks to scare visitors. I'm the girl who runs the photo booth. The maze where I work takes pictures of people when they pass through a specific scary point. And at the end, you can see the photo of yourself and your friends with expressions of pure terror. If you want, you can buy it for $5. It's really funny to see the expressions. Some are absolutely hilarious. I've been here for several weeks, working just a few nights per week. Hundreds of people have passed through, and all of them were photographed screaming, jumping, or looking terrified. Always at the moment when the camera captures the scene. But last Friday night, that changed. Around 8:30 in the evening, a photo loaded on my computer, and I began preparing it for printing. I was notified by message that it was a group of one person, so I'd only need one copy. So far, so good. When I looked at the photo, I saw it was a man alone, dressed entirely in black with an equally black bowler hat. He wasn't screaming or scared. He was just staring at the camera with his face covered in shadows. That made me a bit uncomfortable. I'd never seen anyone react like that, with no emotion whatsoever. Maybe he already knew what was going to happen, or someone had told him about it. I put it aside and continued selling the funny photos to other people for the rest of the night. When we were closing around 11, I was organizing the photos that hadn't been sold. And suddenly, I saw that man's photo again. That's when I realized I had never seen him come by the booth to ask if he wanted to buy the photo. That was weird because everyone has to pass by me to exit the maze. I decided not to worry about it and went home. Now comes the bizarre and scary part. I returned to work on Saturday, and the night went normally until around 8:30 when the same photo appeared again. One person, the man completely in black, not scared, looking directly at the camera. But this time I could see more of his face. He was smiling, but in a terrifying way, showing practically all his teeth. My stomach churned, and all I wanted was to leave. But obviously I couldn't. Saturday is our busiest night. Finally, the night ended. Once again, he didn't show up to get the photo. I called my boss and asked him to take a look. I showed him both photos and explained that the guy never came to talk to me. I was clearly shaken, but he told me not to worry, that it was probably just some prankster trying to scare us. But I am worried. What should I do? I'm working again tonight, so I'll update everyone tomorrow. But I'm scared. What if he appears again? What if he knows I'm the one who works at the booth, and that I'm the one who sees his photos? I'm almost certain that this man, whoever or whatever he is, knows who I am and is here because of me. It seems like he's doing this on purpose. On Sunday night, I asked my boss to have someone stay with me because I was nervous. He said he didn't have anyone extra to put with me, which I understand since Sundays aren't as busy, even close to Halloween. But this one was being different. It wasn't like I needed a bodyguard. At least that's not what he thought. He offered to stop by every hour to see if everything was okay. I felt a bit childish and silly, but I accepted. Early in the evening, it was still light and everything seemed calm. I even started to relax a little, almost feeling a false sense of security. I think I told him everything was under control, and that I'd let him know if anything weird happened. Well, something did happen. Around 7:45, I realized I needed to use the bathroom. I sent a message to my boss asking if he could send someone to cover for me. I didn't get a response, which was strange since he normally responds super quickly to ensure everything runs smoothly. When he finally responded, it was already 8:21. I remember clearly because I was checking my phone every 30 seconds. He said he'd send the girl who handles ticket sales, let's call her Dana, that's not her real name, to replace me for a while because he would handle the tickets. As soon as Dana arrived at the booth, I practically ran to the bathroom because I was already desperate. Of course, there was a line. I waited impatiently when suddenly, a movement in the corner of my eye caught my attention. I looked to the side and only saw the cornfield that surrounded the place, which wasn't part of the maze and extended for miles. And then I saw him. That guy was standing there in the middle of the corn, with the same sinister smile on his face. I looked around and realized there was no longer a line. No one was near me. My blood ran cold, and my heart started racing like never before. I jumped into the portable bathroom, locked the door, and started vomiting. I cried like a child, trembling and sobbing. I stayed locked in there for almost 15 minutes. When I finally came back, I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, completely ignoring the cornfields around me. As soon as I got to the photo booth, Dana noticed I wasn't well at all and sent a message to the boss. He said he couldn't leave the ticket booth, so he asked Dana to stay with me until I felt better. But in an act of pure stupidity, I assured her I was fine and that she should go back to work at tickets. I'd be okay. I have this irrational fear of bothering or disappointing people. So I agreed to stay completely terrified and alone at that damn booth for 2 more hours. Stupid, I know, but it's something I can't help. So Dana left, somewhat reluctantly, I think, and there I was, alone again. By then, it must have been almost 9 at night. I decided to check the photos around 8:30 to see if he had passed through. He hadn't. I think he knew I wasn't at the booth, which is why he was there in the cornfield near the bathrooms and not in the maze. I can't understand what I could have done for him to come after me. Maybe he's not even a bad person. Maybe he just has a message for me or something like that. I really don't know. I know I should simply quit this job, but the idea of leaving them hanging bothers me a lot. It's hard to find someone to train and replace so close to Halloween with the heavy traffic we have. Besides, I don't want to leave because I have a feeling in the pit of my stomach, almost an instinct, that no matter where I go, he's going to try to follow me. I must have been 7 or 8 years old when this happened, and it was close to Halloween. My sister and I were in the living room, enjoying some horror movies. My mom had just left for work. It was around 9:30 at night, and she worked the night shift at a factory about an hour from home. My dad had just walked her to the car and said goodbye, as he always did, watching while she backed out to make sure she left safely since our neighborhood wasn't the safest. After she left, he came back inside, threw himself on the couch, and we continued watching TV. Child's Play had just started, and being a kid, I was always terrified of dolls. I remember curling up on the couch close to one of our dogs. That's when I noticed our dog had woken up and was staring intently at one of the living room doors, the one that led to the front porch. To help you understand better, our front porch was enclosed and looked more like a large entry area. It had an L-shaped table where I used to do my homework or spend time with friends. This was the first room a person entered when coming into the house, right after passing through the 2 front doors. Once inside, you could go left through the old double doors that led to the living room, or go straight through a glass door that led to the kitchen. I looked at the door she was staring at and saw a silhouette standing on our front porch. What I could never understand is how we didn't hear the front door open. Thinking about it now, I think maybe my dad didn't lock the doors properly, or the left one might have been left slightly ajar. We had light curtains on the double doors, so you could see a bit through them to the porch, which we kept lit until bedtime so people would know someone was still awake in the house. I don't remember if it was me or my sister who pointed out the man, but my dad got up and ran to the front porch where the man was now standing. Just to give you a little context about him, my dad was about 6 feet tall and a bit overweight. He had been a nurse and later joined the Marine Corps, so he used to be in great shape and quite intimidating. But after breaking his hip and having surgery, he usually used a walker or limped. So when I say he ran, it wasn't exactly at high speed since he couldn't do that anymore. Even so, he was still quite intimidating in his posture and demeanor. I remember hearing the glass door open and immediately after, a muffled shout. To me, it seemed to last an eternity, but in reality, it probably didn't last more than 10 minutes. My sister, who was 12 at the time, was lying on the floor near the double doors, trying to hear what they were saying. I think I just kept watching the movie or something. Anyway, after a while, my dad came back and sat down. He told us not to worry and to continue watching the movie. Eventually, he ended up turning off the TV early and sent us to bed. But he warned us he was going to sleep downstairs again. I was only 7 or 8 years old, so even though I was smart enough to understand what was happening, I knew he was worried about that guy coming back. I could tell, but I didn't worry much because as a child, you think your parents can solve anything. Fortunately, that man never returned. But a week later, my sister and I ended up discovering what really happened after asking some questions and piecing together the story. Apparently, what happened was that the guy had entered our house and was completely drunk or high. No one was sure. He was going to come in completely, but when he came face to face with my dad, he was surprised. My dad started asking who he was, what he was doing there. The guy just kept repeating, "I'm here to work, man. I need money. Please let me work." My dad tried to get him to leave once, but the guy just stared at him without saying anything, which obviously made my dad even more irritated. He literally had to open the front door and push the guy outside, and the whole time the guy kept repeating, "Please, I need money. Don't send me back out there. Please let me work. I don't want to go back out there." My dad must have finally managed to expel the guy after some harsher words. I don't know for sure if he called the police, but knowing his way, and since no police showed up, I think he decided he had the situation under control. That also explains why he decided to sleep in the living room that night. We never saw that guy again, fortunately, and no one tried to do anything similar after that. Sometimes I wonder if that man was really very drunk or high. But either way, I'm relieved he never came back. This story takes place on the night before Halloween, October 30th. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I know I was still in middle school, maybe 6th or 7th grade, so I definitely wasn't more than 12 years old. Just to give you a bit more context, I didn't weigh more than 90 pounds until I entered high school. I was always very thin with a straight body and not much definition. I wasn't very tall or very short for a girl either. Overall, I was kind of apathetic. But the one holiday that always got me super excited was Halloween. I was and still am passionate about costumes. That night, my mom took my sister and me to a small shopping center where a discount clothing store had recently opened, maybe 3 months before. I call it a mini mall because the only other places open there were a beauty store called Sellers and a Marshall's. We decided to go kind of last minute. It must have been around 8:30 or 9 at night, maybe even later. Sellers was already closed, and both Marshall's and the clothing store were about to close in about an hour. Even so, the store was huge inside, and for Halloween, they had decorated everything from wall to wall with incredible decorations and costumes. It was easy to get lost from your group in there, because they had several rows of tall clothing racks that were practically impossible to see over. As soon as we entered, one of the employees from the fitting room area put on a skeleton mask and jumped out from behind a shelf, giving me the biggest scare of my life. Just me, of course. My mom and sister obviously burst out laughing, and soon after, they left me alone to go shopping on their own. I knew I was in a good mood, so I went looking for a costume for myself. At that time, I was completely addicted to my MP3 player and was listening to music with headphones while browsing through the store. But I couldn't ignore the strange sensation of chills on the back of my neck, as if someone was watching or following me. At one point, I took out one earphone, turned down the volume, and noticed that every time I felt this sensation, the person watching me got closer. I heard the sound of eerie whistling. There were some families in the store too, so I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia and went looking for my family. They told me they were going to stop by the Marshalls next door to do some shopping before they closed, and said I could continue in the store looking around. I should just meet them there later. My mom gave me $20, and then she and my sister left while I continued exploring the store. But that feeling of being watched or followed wouldn't leave me alone. At one point, I looked under the clothing racks and saw a pair of dirty black sneakers on the other side. However, I could never see the person's face. It was at this point that I realized I wasn't going to find any costume there, and started to leave the store to go to Marshall's to find my family. I distinctly remember hearing footsteps right behind me as I walked toward the exit. Even when I changed aisles trying to throw them off, my heart started racing because now I knew I wasn't imagining things anymore. I ran on the school track team, so I was able to pick up the pace without getting tired, but the footsteps continued behind me without pause. Only when I left the store did I finally turn around to see who was following me. I remember being paralyzed when I saw him. It was a white man, probably under 35, dressed all in black with his hood up, staring at me. He didn't have any shopping bags, so he clearly wasn't there to shop. And even when I made eye contact with him, he didn't stop following me. In fact, it seemed like he was even smiling. When I look back, I want to slap myself for not screaming for help right there. But pure terror simply blocked my voice. Instinctively, I turned around and started running. Marshall's was several stores ahead, a considerable distance from the clothing store where I was. But I didn't slow down at all, because I could hear the sound of him running behind me, breathing hard to keep up with me. He was determined to catch me. I remember letting out some desperate whimpers, when I realized he was getting much closer than I had imagined. The fear of being grabbed in that dark and almost deserted shopping center dominated me, and I thought maybe I wouldn't be able to reach my family in time. No one would question it. They'd probably think it was just a Halloween prank. A final burst of energy got me through the automatic door of Marshall's. But to my horror, the man entered right behind me. We were both still running at high speed. My brain could only think of one thing: keep running. I couldn't even scream or warn the people in the store that this wasn't a joke, that I was in real danger. Luckily, being small and agile, I managed to squeeze between two displays of phone cases and headphones, knowing he couldn't get through there because of his size. He literally stuck his arm through one of the openings and tried to grab the back of my shirt. Fortunately, the noise he made trying to grab me ended up attracting the attention of more people in the store. Even so, I didn't stop running. I had no intention of stopping, and when I finally found my mom, I was a mess, crying, sweaty, and barely able to speak. The last thing I saw of that man was him hurriedly leaving the store. To this day, my mom and sister think I exaggerated this whole story. They still firmly believe it was all a prank by the store employee with the skeleton mask. And I hate that because, besides discrediting what I experienced, it ended up scaring both of them. The guy from the store with the skeleton mask was a teenager wearing a bright red uniform. The man who chased me and almost managed to kidnap me was an adult, and he carried an aura of pure terror, something I'll never forget. There are so many things I wish I had done differently, but to this day, I'm very grateful for being small and fast enough to escape from him that day. I wasn't carrying my cell phone because I had gotten into some kind of trouble. So if he had taken me, there would have been practically no way to find me. Just writing this gives me chills. Today, I'm extremely protective of my younger cousins, especially when we're in public places. This happened during my high school years. At that time, I worked part-time at a grocery store, and we had a tradition of organizing some kind of Halloween adventure every year. The first year we went to a haunted forest, then to a haunted corn maze, where I fell face first into a mud puddle right at the beginning. At these events, we went through situations like being trapped in a cabin with various Jason Voorhees characters, being chased by Leatherface, and other crazy stuff like that. It was always fun. If I find the right community, maybe I'll tell those stories another time. Anyway, I want to talk about the third year of this tradition. We were on our way to a haunted factory in a nearby town. This happened before smartphones, so we still relied heavily on printed directions. Since the group was large, we had to split into 3 cars, and I was in the last one with my friends Tyler and Anna. We ended up getting lost because the people in the cars ahead were terrible at following directions. We ended up in a more dangerous area of the city. At one point, we passed through a parking lot and someone shouted something. After a while, our car got separated from the others at a traffic light. When the light turned green again, we had already lost the rest of the group. We drove around for a while, calling the people in the other cars, trying to find each other. I was in the back seat talking on the phone with Sophia, who was in the first car, trying to guide Tyler, who was driving ours, while Sophia was doing the same with her husband, who was driving their car. It wasn't working very well. At one point I said, "Tyler, just stop somewhere and let them come to us." Tyler had several options like a Burger King parking lot or a commercial building parking lot, but he decided to stop in the parking lot of a somewhat suspicious bar. Why, I have no idea. Maybe it was because there was a huge key bank sign nearby that would serve as a reference point for people to find us. While we were there waiting for the others, a line of about 7 cars entered the bar. That wasn't so strange since it was a Friday night, but the way they parked was weird. They surrounded us, all the cars facing us, and parked so close that there was no way for us to get out of there. We were trapped. For a few minutes, they just stared at us from inside the cars. Suddenly, they all started getting out and walking toward us in a large group. There were at least 10 guys with very unfriendly faces, and that's when I was sure they were going to rob us. "Get your wallets," I told Tyler and Anna while doing the same. Honestly, I didn't have much money with me, which made me even more nervous thinking about what they'd do if it wasn't enough. I was terrified but trying to stay calm. Tyler, on the other hand, seemed to be fine. To this day, I can't believe he wasn't even a little worried, especially with a teenager and his girlfriend in the car. Anna, poor thing, was so scared she started crying. The guy who seemed to be the leader was the first to reach the door, coming to the passenger side where Anna and I were. He looked inside the car for a few seconds, and then he and the group went back to their cars and parked normally. I didn't want to take any more risks and said, "Seriously, Tyler, for God's sake, go to the Burger King." In the end, we managed to reunite with the rest of the group and finally reached the factory, which ended up being much less scary than what we had just been through. Maybe it doesn't seem so terrifying, but believe me, it really was. I have some theories. First, the guys got close to the car and realized we didn't have much to offer, so they gave up robbing us. But honestly, I think that option is kind of unlikely. Second, they confused us with someone else until they got close and looked inside. That seems much more possible to me. Third, they were just messing with us. Whatever the reason, I was really terrified. Even today, 13 years later, I look at that city with a certain wariness. On Halloween night, my little brother, who was 9, and my little sister, who was 12, were excited to go trick-or-treating. My mom, knowing I was 15, asked me to accompany them to make sure they stayed safe. I didn't mind doing this. After all, I knew I'd end up getting the candy they were always so picky about and didn't want. They put on their costumes and grabbed bags to carry the candy while I got ready, putting on a jacket along with my iPod and a pocket knife in my pocket. The 3 of us went out together and started going door to door. My routine was simple. First, I'd check if the porch light was on, then I'd go up with my siblings and stay a little behind while they rang the doorbell. The person from the house would open, hand out the candy, and I'd say thank you. I repeated this at every house. Everything was going normally until my little sister started complaining about the cold, and I decided it was time to head back. They held my hands to warm theirs, and I kept them close to me as we walked. We hadn't gone very far. Our house was already visible there on the straight street. There was no one else walking around besides us. About 30 seconds after we started heading back, my little brother noticed a house to our right. about 6 houses before ours, with the porch light on. The curious thing is that this light hadn't been on before. We walked over there, but there was no doorbell. So I opened the storm door and knocked on the wooden door behind it. We waited for a few seconds without hearing a response. I knocked again, nothing. At that moment, I felt something strange and thought it would be best for us to continue on home, much to my little brother's disappointment. We had barely gotten back to the street and started walking again when we heard the house door open and a man shouted, "Hey!" I immediately turned around, still holding my siblings' hands, and saw a tall man standing in the open doorway. I couldn't see his face properly, or what he was wearing since it was dark, and the light was coming from behind him. But from the tone of his voice, he seemed to be middle-aged. The inner wooden door was completely open, and he was holding the storm door with his right arm, leaning on the frame. Behind him, I could see a carpeted staircase, and further back, what appeared to be a well-lit kitchen with a ceiling light. I don't remember exactly the words exchanged between us, but the essence of the conversation stayed clear in my head. He shouted something like, "I have candy in here." The tone of voice, even without seeing him, gave the impression that he was smiling. This only increased the strange feeling I was already having. Behind him, I saw no sign of candy. My intuition and all the lectures about not trusting strangers that I'd heard in childhood came to the surface. I knew very well that entering a stranger's house, especially on Halloween, was a terrible idea. I squeezed my siblings' silent hands tightly and replied, "No, thank you," already starting to walk faster, pulling them along with me. As we moved away, he shouted again, "Are you sure?" This time it sounded almost like he was begging. Without stopping, I looked over my shoulder and said, "Yes." He responded, "Oh, okay," in a strange way, as if he were exaggeratedly sad. Soon after, he went inside and closed the door. Who was this strange man? An adult trying to get children to enter his house on Halloween, and even pretending to be hurt when we refused. That gave me a very bad feeling, and as we hurried home, I told my siblings never to enter a stranger's house, especially on Halloween. We got home quickly, and when my mom and I were checking all the candy to see if it was intact, I told her about the man. She was worried, but we ended up not doing anything about it. Never try to get children to enter your house on Halloween, whatever your intentions, innocent or not. There's an old children's rhyme about Lizzie Borden that everyone knows, though it's not entirely accurate historically. One thing is undeniable. Lizzie Borden will always be remembered in connection with the deaths of her father and stepmother on August 4th, 1892. To this day, the house where it all happened is considered one of the most famous haunted attractions in the United States, drawing curious visitors and ghost hunters alike. But to understand what really happened during the trial, we need to go back in time and learn more about the woman behind the crime. In Fall River, Massachusetts, Lizzie Andrew Borden was born on July 19, 1860, daughter of Andrew and Sarah Borden. Her father, Andrew, was one of Fall River's most prosperous businessmen, with a fortune estimated at $300,000 in 1892. In today's values, that would be more than $9,600,000. Andrew made his name in real estate business, presiding over a bank and running textile factories. Despite all this success, he was notoriously stingy, especially when it came to spending on his wife and daughters, Lizzie and Emma. The Borden family was well known for their strong religious involvement, with the girls participating actively in church activities and responsibilities. Lizzie especially was a popular Sunday school teacher and dedicated herself to various religious organizations. After his wife's death, Mr. Borden married again to Abby Durfee Gray, a respected woman in the community. It was no secret to anyone that Lizzie had great contempt for her new stepmother, to the point of only referring to her as Mrs. Borden. The tension between the two was so strong that, according to their longtime housekeeper, Bridget Sullivan, the family almost never ate main meals together. The heavy atmosphere inside the house only increased, and in many accounts, this seems to have been one of the main factors that led to the murders of Andrew and Abby. For example, Lizzie and Emma used to take expensive trips at their father's expense, something he clearly didn't approve of. Still, Mr. Borden didn't hesitate to give Abby's family real estate and other goods, which provoked even more resentment between the sisters and their father. There was a peculiar incident in which Abby Borden feared that her family's life was at risk. Everyone became gravely ill after consuming mutton that had been left on the stove for days, as that week's main protein source. But to Abby, this seemed like more than just a simple case of food poisoning. She suspected it was retaliation, since Andrew had made enemies in Fall River. This theory persisted until an unexpected visitor appeared at the Borden house one day before Andrew and Abby were found dead. John Morse, Sarah Borden's brother, arrived to discuss new business with Andrew. They say the conversation quickly turned into a heated argument. From there, the rest, as they say, became history. On the tragic day of August 4th, 1892, Andrew and John had one last discussion around 8:48. John left taking a pair of oxen and commented that he would return for the main meal at noon. However, that meal would never happen. Between 9 and 10:30, Abby went upstairs to the guest room to make the bed, a task normally shared between Lizzie and Emma. It was at that moment that footsteps were heard going up the stairs, stopping right behind Abby in the guest room. That's where the frenzy of blows began. They say Abby turned to face her attacker when she was struck on the side of the head with an axe, suffering a deep cut above her ear and on the side of her skull. As she fell face first onto the wooden floor, the nursery rhyme becomes reality. Abby was struck more than 17 times on the back of her head as she took her last breath. Meanwhile, unaware that his wife was dead upstairs, Andrew returned home, being received by housekeeper Bridget. According to legend, Andrew's key couldn't open the front door, and he had to knock several times until Bridget let him in. Later that day, Bridget remembered hearing Lizzie's laughter coming from the top of the stairs, although she couldn't see her. When Andrew asked about Abby's whereabouts, Lizzie mentioned she hadn't seen her since breakfast and imagined she was taking care of a sick friend. Shortly after, Andrew went to the living room where he took off his boots and put on his slippers, preparing to take a nap before returning to work. What happened next completes the other half of that frightening children's rhyme. While Andrew slept, he was attacked with the same axe that had taken his second wife's life, being fatally struck on the head between 10 and 11 times. One of the most disturbing photos from the crime scene shows Andrew's head completely caved in by the blows, with one eye cut in half, hanging from his face, still covered in blood. At the time of the attack, Bridget was cleaning windows upstairs when she heard Lizzie in panic screaming from downstairs that her father was dead, and that someone had broken in and killed him. Dr. Bowen, the family doctor and neighbor of the Bordens, quickly crossed the street and declared that both Andrew and Abby were already dead. The investigation into the Borden murders began immediately, and Lizzie, Emma, and Bridget were questioned thoroughly. Lizzie's responses to investigators were inconsistent and strangely inappropriate for the time, which quickly raised suspicions about her. One of the testimonies used in the trial was that before the murders, Lizzie had mentioned hearing a scratching sound and possibly a moan before going back inside the house. However, later she retracted this statement, saying she hadn't heard anything and didn't know Abby had been murdered. When Lizzie claimed she hadn't seen Abby at the time of her death, both Bridget and a neighbor proved otherwise, since when going up the stairs, they could clearly see Abby's body face down in the guest room. Police also noticed that Lizzie's behavior was strangely distant for someone who had just lost her parents in such a brutal way. She seemed calm, cold, and controlled during the forensic sweep of the house. The authorities found what appeared to be the murder weapon in the basement, an axe with a broken handle. At that time, a forensic analysis of Andrew and Abby's stomachs was performed to check if they had been poisoned, but the results were negative. In the weeks leading up to the murders, Lizzie was seen buying acid to preserve her valuable furs, but this didn't appear in the autopsy reports. Police also didn't do a thorough inspection of Lizzie's room during the investigation because she claimed to be feeling ill, and the authorities decided not to insist, what would later be considered a crucial error. On the night of August 4th, police were on watch at the Borden house to protect the surviving family members when something macabre was observed. They saw Lizzie and a family friend, Alice Russell, go down to the basement carrying a bucket and a kerosene lamp. By then, John Morse had already returned to the Borden house and retired to the other guest room. The next morning, he was attacked by several Fall River residents and had to be escorted back to the house by police to ensure his safety. Other investigations were carried out, including the inspection of some clothes in the house and the seizure of the supposed murder weapon. As the night progressed, rumors spread throughout the city. According to Alice, Lizzie's friend, when she went down to the kitchen, she saw Lizzie tearing up one of her favorite dresses. Lizzie explained that the dress was stained with paint, and the only solution was to burn it. Lizzie's hearing took place on August 8, 1892, and the state of Massachusetts decided the inquiry would be private. Her request to have the family lawyer was denied. Once again, Lizzie's behavior was considered quite inappropriate during the inquiry because she was taking morphine to control her nerves, which ended up hurting her case even more. On August 11th, Lizzie was arrested and placed in jail. Her preliminary hearing was deemed inadmissible. In June 1893, a grand jury was formed in November 7th, and the indictment occurred on December 2nd. Lizzie Borden's trial was long and exhausting, beginning on June 5th, 1893, in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Ironically, just 5 days before the trial began, There was another axe murder in Fall River that took the life of a woman named Bertha Manchester in her own kitchen. Although the cases were similar, Lizzie was not involved in this crime. The culprit was a Portuguese immigrant named José Correa de Mello, who was arrested and convicted of Bertha's murder in 1894. During Lizzie's trial, the axe found in the Borden house was dismissed as the murder weapon. Prosecutors insisted the handle could have been discarded because it was covered with blood. The episode of the dress burned by Lizzie was also mentioned in court, but resulted in nothing relevant to the defense. In a striking moment of the trial, the severed heads of Andrew and Abby were presented as forensic evidence, revealing to the jury the extent of the injuries the victims had suffered. Lizzie fainted in court upon seeing the evidence. After long debates in court, Lizzie's fate was in the hands of the jury. On June 20th, 1893, after 1 hour and 30 minutes of deliberation, Lizzie Borden was acquitted of any involvement in her parents' deaths. Although rumors and speculation continued to haunt Fall River, Lizzie always maintained her innocence from beginning to end. To this day, no one has been arrested or charged with the murders of Andrew and Abby Borden, and the mystery remains unsolved. Over the years, Lizzie and Emma left the family home and moved to a new property in a wealthy neighborhood of Fall River. Lizzie died of pneumonia on June 1st, 1927, at 66 years old. Her sister Emma died 9 days later in a nursing home in Newmarket, New Hampshire. Today, the Lizzie Borden case continues to be widely discussed, with new theories being explored and analyzed. While her infamous reputation lives on in countless books, movies, television series, and even podcast episodes, the old Borden family house now operates as a famous bed and breakfast and haunted attraction where visitors can experience the supernatural encounters that many claim occur throughout the house. So the decision is yours. Was Lizzie really innocent, or was she indeed guilty? The busy routine of a famous amusement park in Long Beach, California, was interrupted by a terrifying discovery in one of its most visited attractions, the Funhouse. During the filming of an episode of the TV show, The $6 Million Man, at the location, one of the crew members accidentally bumped into a mannequin that was hanging from the ceiling. The impact caused the dummy's arm to fall off, but what seemed like just a momentary scare turned into absolute shock when, upon examining the fallen arm, they realized there was a real human bone inside the figure. They were the mummified remains of an unknown man. Thanks to forensic investigations, the mannequin was identified as Elmer McCurdy, a train robber who never succeeded in his crimes. Elmer was born in 1880 in the state of Maine, son of a single mother who never revealed who his father was. As a teenager, he gained fame as the town's rebellious drunk. At 20, he lost his mother suddenly, and not knowing what to do, he decided to head west in search of riches and work. In 1907, he was drafted into the army during World War I, where he learned to handle explosives, including the use of nitroglycerin. When the war ended, Elmer went through great financial difficulties, and desperate for a way to make money quickly, he plunged into the world of crime, beginning his journey towards self-destruction. At this time, Elmer began traveling through different cities, robbing trains and banks wherever he went. With his knowledge of nitroglycerin's power, he believed he could use the corrosive material to open safes more easily, grab the money, and move on to his next stop. However, he always faced the same problem. His strategy never worked as expected. This became clear in 1911 in Oklahoma, when Elmer tried to rob a train. He placed the explosives in the safe, but the explosion only melted the silver that was inside, making it completely useless. Another frustrated attempt happened in Kansas when he was discovered while trying to break the outside of a bank safe, alerting the entire town to the robbery. Finally, in October 1911, Elmer believed he was about to pull off his big score. He and some accomplices planned to rob a train in Oklahoma that was transporting payments for the Osage tribe. They thought this would be the biggest success of all, but once again, their expectations were wrong. They really found the train, but discovered too late that it wasn't a freight train. It was a passenger train. In the end, the robbers fled with only $46 and 2 gallons of corn whiskey. Disillusioned and tired of living as the failure he always knew himself to be, Elmer took a bottle of whiskey and hid in a barn between Oklahoma and Kansas, trying to drown his sorrows. What he didn't know was that the police were already on his trail and would soon catch up to him. Ready for a confrontation, after an intense shootout that went through the barn walls, Elmer was killed, being declared dead on October 7, 1911. His body was taken to a funeral home in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, where it was embalmed while waiting for someone to claim it. But that day never came. It was then that the funeral home owner decided he would make some money from this unlucky man's body. Elmer was displayed as a morbid attraction, also serving as macabre advertising for the funeral services offered. 5 years passed, and Elmer's body was still being used as a popular attraction, until a group of circus owners decided to try to take him. The funeral director resisted the idea at first, but was eventually convinced when the circus people claimed to be distant relatives of Elmer, and said they wanted to give him a dignified burial. Convinced, the director allowed them to take the body, which quickly became one of the circus's biggest attractions, presented to the public as the bandit who wouldn't give up. For more than 65 years, Elmer's body was passed from one circus to another, year after year, without anyone knowing that inside that pine box wasn't a mannequin, but a real human corpse displayed as a morbid curiosity. Eventually, Elmer ended up in Long Beach, California, at Pike's Amusement Park, where he hung in the funhouse until that fateful day when the TV crew made the terrible discovery. After his last journey, Elmer McCurdy was finally taken to his resting place at Summit View Cemetery in Guthrie, Oklahoma, where he could rest in peace once and for all. Almost everyone who's been on this planet for a good while has heard of the famous Japanese video game and movie franchise Silent Hill, and the small American town that helped popularize this story, Centralia, Pennsylvania. But what really connects these two things? And how did such a bustling community end up becoming the toxic ghost town it is today? I hate to disappoint many game fans out there, but the truth is that Centralia has very little to do with Silent Hill, beyond the fact that it continues releasing toxic gases into the air, creating that foggy atmosphere that many people have learned to identify and enjoy. For the residents of Centralia, this place was once home to a thriving mining community in northeastern Pennsylvania, with 14 coal mines in full operation and a population of about 2,500 people until the early 20th century. But over time, the population began to decline and stabilized, even with many refusing to abandon their homes when the government got involved. Today, the town remains marked by an underground fire that was never completely extinguished. Centralia's history is rich and full of details. Beyond the enormous fossil fuel reserves that lie just below the surface, the mines, for example, were often left aside, even during the construction of the Mine Run Railroad back in the 19th century. Curiously, the town was originally called Bull's Head in honor of the local tavern, Bull's Head Tavern, which opened in 1832. Only in 1842 was the land purchased by the Locust Mountain Coal and Iron Company, beginning the great mining boom. Many of the ores found were anthracite coal, an abundant type of hard, black coal with a smooth metallic shine that gained several nicknames over time, such as black coal, blind coal, Kilkenny coal, and also black diamond coal. This type of coal is the richest in carbon and occupies the highest position in the classification of all coals we know. A man named Alexander Rhea, a mining engineer who would later become the town's founder, brought his family to Bull's Run and began developing the region as a Bull's Run village. The place came to be called Centerville, and soon after, Centralia. The town was growing, becoming a place where families could settle. Money, work opportunities, and a flourishing economy drove everything. But as they say, all good things come to an end, and Centralia's tragedy began with its own founder. Alexander Rhea was brutally murdered by members of the secret society called the Molly Maguires while traveling from Centralia to Mount Carmel in 1868. After the crime, 3 men were convicted and hanged in Bloomsburg about 10 years later, and many other members of the Molly Maguires were captured throughout the state of Pennsylvania. This, however, was not the only time the Molly Maguires brought chaos to Centralia. There's a local legend that says Father Daniel Ignatius McDermott cast a curse on the town after being attacked by some members of the group in 1869. According to the story, he predicted that Saint Ignatius of Loyola Church would be the last building to remain standing in Centralia, a harbinger of what was to come. Until the 1980s, descendants of the Molly Maguires still lived in town. But of course, this was always seen as part of the legend. At Centralia's peak, the town had an impressive population of about 2,761 people, counting several churches of different Christian denominations, 5 hotels, 27 saloons, 2 theaters, a bank, a post office, and 14 stores. However, the town began to feel the weight of population decline as the United States prepared for World War I. Then the stock market crash in 1929 brought another heavy blow, leading to the closure of 5 Lehigh Valley Coal Company mines and leaving many workers unemployed, pushing Centralia into accelerated decay. Even with these cuts, some underground miners continued extracting coal to survive. They began using various risky techniques like pillar mining, where coal was removed from the areas that supported the mine's ceiling. They say this practice contributed to the collapse of several mines, which ended up marking the town's decline as we know it. On that fateful Memorial Day weekend, May 27th, 1962, the fires in Centralia's mines began when a coal vein caught fire underground and quickly spread through a labyrinth of tunnels, consuming more than 3,700 acres of land. There are still discussions about what really caused these fires. Some believe they were controlled fires started by firefighters to clean the town's landfill, but got out of control. Others say the fire began when a group of underground mining brothers tried to burn coal underground near the landfill, but were overcome by toxic gases, resulting in their death. As the fire spread, the fire department would have covered the landfill with fire-resistant material to try to contain the flames. But 2 days later, residents were shocked to see fire emerging at various points throughout the town. On June 4th, as the fire continued, residents began complaining of an unbearable smell entering their homes and businesses, leaving many seriously ill. Now the challenge was in the hands of the town council to decide how they would face this increasingly frightening disaster. A mine inspector was called to assess the situation. After the inspection, a letter was sent to Lehigh Valley Coal Company, reporting that the fire had started from an unknown origin and was completely out of control. As the fire spread, increasingly lethal amounts of carbon monoxide began infiltrating the mines, making Centralia an extremely dangerous place to live. There were several attempts to extinguish the underground fires, but most failed. One attempt involved the state of Pennsylvania digging trenches to expose the flames trapped underground, which would facilitate their extinction. However, as architects analyzed the plan better, it became clear there was a major obstacle: the astronomical cost of removing all the necessary amount of soil. The project quickly ran out of funds. Another plan consisted of using a mixture of crushed rock and water to try to smother the fires. But once again, problems arose when extremely low temperatures caused the water lines to freeze, interrupting the work. In the end, this project also ran out of resources after exceeding the $100,000 mark. Even with all these failures, Centralia residents weren't ready to abandon their homes. People still tried to lead normal lives, although many had moved away from the toxins coming from the soil. All living beings began to suffer. Residents became ill, fainting in their homes due to carbon monoxide poisoning, and the region's fauna and flora died slowly and painfully. However, it was only on February 14th, 1981, that one of the biggest tragedies brought national attention. A 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski fell into a 150-foot deep hole that suddenly opened under his feet. Fortunately, he survived by grabbing onto a tree root and being rescued by his cousin. It was then that the federal government decided to act. In 1983, they arrived in town with an offer of $42 million, ready to buy the town, demolish the buildings, and relocate residents to safer places. However, even so, not everyone was willing to leave their homes. Of the original population, only 63 people continued in Centralia in 1993. And for the state of Pennsylvania, these few people came to be considered invaders in their own homes, since the state had no choice but to apply eminent domain over the town. Years passed, and in 2013, fewer than 10 residents remained who managed to reach an agreement with the state. Each received a significant sum of $349,000 and the right to remain in their homes until the end of their lives. After the death of the last residents, the state of Pennsylvania would take possession of the land and demolish any construction that still remained. The then mayor of Centralia, Lamar Mervyn, remembered how he and his wife decided to stay, refusing the government's initial rescue offer. He told how his wife looked at the state representatives and clearly said they couldn't take their house. It was the only house the couple had ever known and owned, and they wanted to keep it while they were alive. When Mervyn died in 2010 at 93 years old, his house was the last construction remaining in a 3-block area. Today, the fire still burns in Centralia's underground, and experts estimate there's enough coal to keep the flames burning for another 250 years. As for the few residents who remain, about 5 people still call Centralia home and don't seem to have plans to leave anytime soon. The municipal building remains standing, as does the fire station, the Church of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary on the town's outskirts, and an Orthodox cemetery, in addition to Saints Peter and Paul Church and Cemetery, located a bit further away. Even today, Centralia continues to attract curious tourists who want to see with their own eyes the real Silent Hill. Looking through the fog and suffocating vapors, you'll see a ghost town where once there were houses and people. Now there are trees and plants taking over the scenery. Warning signs try to keep visitors away, but if you decide to ignore them and make a stop, remember Centralia's history and how it was once a prosperous town. Who knows, maybe you'll even say a silent prayer for it. For those who believe in ghost stories and local legends, maybe it was Father Daniel McDermott's curse that led Centralia to this tragic and unfortunate end. My life has always unfolded in the shadow of my older brother. I don't carry this with resentment, but it's the plain truth. He built a successful business, and I've spent much of the last 7 years trying to follow a similar path. Recently, I moved back to my parents' house to try to find my way. Returning seemed like a step backward, but it was the only option I had. I was staying in the basement so as not to disturb my parents. It wasn't so bad, actually. It was almost like a mini apartment. The space had a small kitchen, bathroom, office, bedroom, and even a TV with my old video games. With all this, I hardly ever went upstairs, living practically isolated down there, which helped me not feel like a complete burden. On a Friday night, a violent storm took over outside. The rain hammered against the windows, and the wind was so strong that the entire house shook. I can't exaggerate how intense it was, one of the fiercest storms I had ever witnessed. My parents were away for the weekend, and I had the whole house to myself, which wasn't bad at all. That night, I was especially comfortable down in the basement. I love listening to a storm unfolding while I'm safe in a warm bed, especially in the middle of the night. There's something about the feeling of being protected amid the chaos of a storm that brings an inexplicable peace. I was about to fall asleep to the soft sound of the rain when the power suddenly went out, leaving everything in complete darkness. I let out a groan of frustration. I figured the storm must have knocked out the electricity, and for a moment thought about checking the circuit breaker. but I wasn't in the mood to face the storm outside. Besides, I was already almost asleep and didn't even know exactly where the circuit breaker was located. I decided to wait and deal with it the next morning. As I tried to relax again, I heard a sound, a loud, strange thud coming from one of the basement windows. It was a heavy sound, as if something had hit it with force. My first reaction was to think that perhaps the wind had knocked down a branch or some tree. But the sound was precise and deliberate, different from anything I had heard before. Even reluctantly, I couldn't ignore it. It was something more serious than just a power outage. Reluctantly, I got out of bed, grabbed my phone, and turned on the flashlight to examine the window. The basement was in complete darkness, with only the sound of rain beating on the glass and thunder in the distance. I ran my hand over my face, trying to stay awake, and raised my phone to illuminate the window. At that moment, my heart nearly stopped. A face was pressed against the glass, staring at me. The man had wide eyes, pale and soaked skin, and for a brief second he made eye contact with me. As soon as he realized I was looking at him, he moved away from the window. I recoiled, almost dropping my phone. What had I just seen? My heart raced and my breathing became labored, but I didn't have time to process what had happened because seconds later, I began to hear another sound, footsteps. I listened carefully. The floor above me creaked slightly. There were people in the house. Between what I had seen and what I was hearing, I was on the verge of losing control. I was alone, and my house was being invaded. And worse, one of them knew I was in the basement. I couldn't think clearly. Everything was happening too quickly. But I knew I had to do something. I quickly checked my phone, ready to call the police, but remembered that the power outage had knocked out the Wi-Fi, and I had no cell signal down there, leaving me completely isolated. I knew I couldn't just wait for those invaders to do whatever they had in mind. I tried to calm myself, evaluating my options. I couldn't let those people roam through the house, but confronting them head-on was unthinkable. I was trapped in a no-win situation. I decided to sneak upstairs and try to exit through the front door without making noise to call the police from outside. I had no other choice. Walking as quietly as possible, I went to the basement stairs. I still remember the pure fear of that moment. You never know how your body will react to something traumatic until you're living it. When I reached the top, I peered around the corner of the staircase. My heart sank when I saw 3 figures with flashlights walking through the completely dark house. I observed for a few seconds, paralyzed with fear. A flashlight passed over one of them long enough for me to notice what he was carrying: a gun. I was frozen, all muscles tense. I stood watching as they murmured among themselves, in low voices. It was then that I heard one of them say something that made everything even more frightening, if that was possible. In a calm, almost casual voice, he said, "Jason is in the basement. Go get him." I can't describe the terror I felt. How did they know my name? I went back down the stairs as silently as possible, trying to keep my breathing under control. But I was falling apart inside. I knew I didn't have much time. They were coming after me, and I had no idea what they would do when they found me. I frantically looked around for a hiding place. There was no time. I needed to get out of there that minute, or it would be my end. The only possible exit was one of the basement windows, but they were all locked from the inside. I had no other choice. I grabbed a small stool, climbed up to one of the window wells, and broke the glass with my elbow. Shards flew everywhere, but I didn't care. I crawled out through the broken window, immediately being drenched by the rain. I felt cuts all over my body, but the pain was dulled by adrenaline and fear. The rain soaked me completely as I ran through the mud, trying not to slip. When I was at a safe distance from the house, I finally got a signal and called the police. My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold the phone. When the police arrived and searched the house, the intruders were already gone. They had taken so many things that I couldn't even list them all. The power outage had been intentional, which wasn't a surprise. My parents were furious and threatened to kick me out of the house. I had to practically beg them to reconsider, insisting that there was nothing more I could have done. Eventually, they calmed down, but I'm still shaken. To this day, I have no idea who those people were or how they knew my name. What scares me most is thinking about what might have happened if they had found me. The police later told me they believed it was a coordinated break-in by a group that had been targeting homes in the area. They theorized that the intruders might have learned my name from mail or documents in the house. But what bothers me most is that they seem to know I was there alone. It makes me wonder if they had been watching the house for days, waiting for my parents to leave. I live in a quiet area on the outskirts of town, but there are several more populous cities a short drive away. A few months ago, I got a night job as a security guard at a warehouse located in one of these neighboring cities. The warehouse was in an industrial zone that stretched for miles, an isolated building with rows upon rows of tall metal shelves and some large loading docks. The job was simple: routine rounds, basic security, ensuring everything was properly locked. It was quiet, too quiet actually, but that didn't bother me. I enjoy solitude, and most nights passed without anything noteworthy happening. On a rainy Thursday, I was checking my phone from time to time to see updates about the storm, since the idea of driving home in those conditions didn't appeal to me. Fortunately, it was a quiet night, so at least I wouldn't have to deal with much. The power in the warehouse flickered a few times but remained stable, so I wasn't concerned. But about an hour later, the power went out completely, plunging the entire warehouse into total darkness. I was irritated. I was the only staff member on duty, so it was up to me to resolve the situation. Although I had been trained for something like this, I never imagined I would actually have to deal with it. I left my small security office to start the procedure. I had been instructed to disconnect some of the large machines before checking the circuit breakers, so I began there. The flashlight was my only light source, and I'll be honest, the environment was frightening. The silence seemed denser in the darkness, and every creak of the building sounded even louder without the hum of the lights. My footsteps echoed intensely, creating a strange sensation as I walked. While walking down one of the corridors, I heard a loud metallic bang echoing from somewhere deeper in the warehouse. It startled me, but I ignored it, thinking it was the wind from the storm moving the roof or the metal shutters. Still, I decided to check corridor by corridor. As I turned a corner, I stopped abruptly. A faint beam of light was moving along the shelves ahead. It looked exactly like the beam from my flashlight. Within seconds, the light disappeared, but I knew I had seen it. No one should be there until the next morning. I felt my heart race. What on earth would someone be doing there? I thought about calling out, but decided against it. When I reached the spot where I had seen the light, it was already gone. The corridor was empty, just rows of boxes and shelves full of merchandise. I began to get uneasy, because I knew I wasn't imagining things. I had a job to do, however, and I contemplated calling the police, but wasn't sure if what I'd seen was enough. Maybe, just maybe, I was imagining things. On second thought, if the company hadn't provided me with a taser, I probably would have called the police right then and there. As I continued my rounds, a strange smell hit me, a metallic, musty odor like rusty metal or stagnant water. The smell was coming from one of the loading docks, a darker area of the warehouse where boxes were stacked from floor to ceiling. I followed the smell with my flashlight, and that's when I noticed something strange. The light reflected off the polished concrete floor, revealing 2 sets of wet footprints leading to one of the storage corridors. At that moment, the urge to run in the opposite direction and call the police was strong, but I knew I couldn't. If someone was in there, it was my responsibility to deal with it. After all, that was my job. Curiosity ended up speaking louder, and I decided to follow the footprints, keeping my flashlight low, trying not to make it clear where I was. As I approached, I began to hear low, almost inaudible whispers, as if 2 people were talking a few meters away. I couldn't understand the words, but something in the tone seemed tense, almost desperate. I turned off my flashlight and held my breath, trying to move without making any noise. With the taser firmly in my hand, I approached the whispers. When I turned the corner, I raised the flashlight to confront whoever was there. But to my surprise, there was no one in front of me. The whispers had also ceased, which was surreal. They had been there, very close. How could they have disappeared so quickly? The whole situation had me on edge. I decided I wasn't getting paid enough to deal with this, and that the best option was to draw a straight line to the circuit breaker room and turn the power back on without wasting time on other tasks. I arrived at the location and began fiddling with the breakers in the dark. While doing this, I heard something scratch the floor near me. I turned the flashlight around and spotted the tip of a metal tool a few meters away, a crowbar. It hadn't been there before. The situation had become serious. Whoever was there probably had less than friendly intentions. I shouted that I was armed, although it was a bluff considering I only had the taser. I needed to get out of there as soon as possible. My nerves were on the verge of collapse, but I knew my safety was more important than any consequences I might face for leaving like that. As I headed for the exit, a loud metallic sound reverberated from the other side of the building, followed by the clear sound of rapid footsteps. I felt the adrenaline take over, and I began running toward the noise. As I turned the corner, I came face to face with them. In the middle of the corridor were 2 figures dressed entirely in black. One of them was holding a crowbar identical to the one I had seen earlier. They looked at me for a moment, and without any warning, they began running in my direction. I didn't think twice. I simply turned and ran. All the confidence I had gathered disappeared in an instant. I could hear their footsteps echoing behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I zigzagged through the corridors, hoping I knew the place better than they did. After what seemed like an eternity, the footsteps finally faded. I stopped trying to catch my breath and realized they had stopped following me. Carefully, I made my way to the exit door and immediately left. I called the police right away, asking them to come as quickly as possible. They did arrive quickly, and I was very grateful for that. Of course, those two strangers had long since disappeared, but the police were attentive and even helped me turn the power back on. My boss, on the other hand, wasn't so understanding. He gave me a severe reprimand for leaving the building, and I almost lost my job because of the incident. To this day, I can't get over how strange the situation was. It was clear that those people were there to intimidate me, but even so, they chased me with a weapon in hand. The worst part is that I still work in that warehouse during the night, although now my boss always schedules at least 2 people for the night shift. I'm still trying to understand everything that happened. I'm just relieved those guys didn't catch up to me. The police suggested they were probably looking to steal inventory and weren't expecting a security guard to be present. The warehouse stored some valuable electronics, which would explain their interest. What's strange is that they didn't just run away when they saw me. They actually chased me down. That's the part that still keeps me on edge during my night shifts. Last summer, I turned 17 and started my first job at a small pizzeria in my town. It was a family place with a staff of only 5 or 6 people. I got the job thanks to my best friend who already worked there. My role was making deliveries, and I only took the night shift because I had classes during the day. It was around my 3rd week at this job that the strange incident happened. The night was going smoothly, few delivery orders and few customers in the dining room. It was a bit chilly, which made most people prefer to stay at home. Around 11 o'clock, a call came in. My friend answered and took down the order, a small pizza and a soda. They prepared everything quickly, and soon I was on the road making the delivery. The address wasn't far, just about 10 minutes away, but when I entered the street, I was faced with a pothole and realized the road was full of cracks and irregularities. It looked like a scene of abandonment, much worse than any other area of the city. I drove cautiously, avoiding the potholes until I reached my destination. It was a 2-story wooden house. The place seemed as aged and forgotten as the street, but curiously, the garden was full of well-maintained flowers and plants. I parked and grabbed the pizza and soda, walking to the front door. The wooden steps of the porch creaked under my feet, and a strange feeling of quietness began to bother me. I looked back at the car, with the view of the dense forest in the background, and realized how isolated the place seemed. I knocked on the door. After a few moments, I heard sounds from the other side, and the floor creaking as if someone was walking slowly through the interior of the house, coming ever closer. I waited with the pizza in hand, expecting the door to open. But that didn't happen. After about 10 seconds, I started to feel uncomfortable. "Hello, I'm the pizza delivery guy. I'm here with your order." No response. The silence inside the house was total. Something seemed very wrong, so I backed away and went down the steps. I was a bit hesitant to leave without them having paid, but I decided to take one last look. As I did so, a chill ran down my spine. A man was standing beside the house, staring fixedly at me as if he had been coming in my direction, and had stopped when he noticed I saw him. He looked old and thin, with a peculiar look in his eyes. I ran back to the car, while he continued to just observe me without saying anything. I quickly drove away and returned to the pizzeria. I couldn't understand what had happened. My friends suggested it might have been a prank, but that man seemed too old for that kind of thing. All I know is that I was relieved to have left in time, because I have no idea what would have happened if he had reached me on the porch. The next day, my manager called me into his office. Apparently, someone had called the restaurant to complain that their pizza never arrived. When we checked the address against the previous night's order, it was completely different, not even in the same neighborhood. I had delivered a pizza to an address that hadn't ordered anything. Confused, we checked the caller ID from the previous night's order. The number didn't exist. A week later, I was making another delivery in a different part of town when I saw a newspaper at the customer's doorstep. The headline caught my eye instantly. Local recluse found dead in home after decades. The picture showed the same house I had delivered to. According to the article, the man had died 20 years earlier, but because he had no family and the house was so isolated, no one had discovered his body until a utility worker came to disconnect the long unpaid services. The article mentioned that locals had reported seeing lights in the house, and even claiming to have seen the man walking in the garden over the years. I never told anyone at work what I saw, and I quit the job the following week. Some things just can't be explained, and I wasn't keen on making any more late-night deliveries after that. To this day, I still wonder about who or what placed that order and who was standing next to that house. But some questions are better left unanswered. It was one of those cold nights in early November. This happened just a couple of years ago. I had just returned from work after a long shift that kept me until late. It was past midnight when I finally entered my house, and fatigue was visible in my every movement. All I wanted was to crack open a cold beer, collapse on the couch, and forget about the world. And that's exactly what I did. There's nothing like the taste of that first beer after an exhausting day. I didn't even turn on the TV right away. I just let myself fall onto the couch with my eyes closed, feet up, trying to push away the troubling thoughts about the stress in my life. As I flipped through the channels, my frustration grew. Nothing seemed remotely interesting. After a few minutes of channel surfing, I gave up and decided to enjoy my beer in silence. But as if it were a rule in my life, peace and quiet were luxuries difficult to maintain. Not 10 seconds had passed when all the lights in the house went out at the same time. You know, that almost imperceptible sound that comes a moment before everything goes dark. Yeah, it's the sound I hate most. Our house had this strange habit of losing power from time to time, and it still does to this day. My first reaction was to go outside to see if the blackout had affected the neighboring houses. I closed the door behind me, trying to keep in what little heat still remained in the house, in case I couldn't resolve the situation quickly. It was late, but I saw that at least one of the houses on the street was still lit, confirming that the problem was indeed just in my house. I sighed, closing my eyes, already anticipating the headache that would end the little pleasure I had hoped to have that night. As I turned to enter again, I noticed something strange. The doorknob wouldn't turn. It was locked. I stood there trying to understand what was happening. I tried turning it a few more times, but it was useless. I called my wife's name, knocking on the door, imagining she might have woken up while I was outside. Absolute silence. I looked through the glass and saw that everything was still in darkness. I ran to the back door, but it was also locked. Panic began to take over. My wife had a habit of leaving doors unlocked, so the fact that the back door was locked was quite unusual. I went to the side of the house to check the circuit breaker and stopped suddenly. The garden hose, which I knew I had left coiled up, was stretched out on the grass just below the circuit breaker box. A feeling of shock ran through me. Someone had deliberately cut the power. Without thinking much, I ran to the nearest window and desperately looked inside. This time, I noticed two flashlights swinging frantically in the dark, as if searching through everything. They were robbing my house right there, while I was just a few meters away. Fury consumed me. The audacity of someone to enter like that, knowing I was nearby. I reached into my pocket, ready to call the police, but only then realized I had left my phone on the couch. I let out a quiet curse and decided that the only way would be to run to the neighbor's house to borrow their phone. But when I took the first step in their direction, a darker thought came over me. My wife was still inside. She was probably sleeping, defenseless against whoever was invading our house. I couldn't leave her alone, not for a second longer. I turned around and ran back to the house, picking up some loose rocks from the garden along the way. I started throwing them at our bedroom window, hoping she would wake up. On the third attempt, she finally opened the window. Before she could ask anything, I was already whispering what was happening and asked her to hide in the closet. She disappeared quickly from the window without asking questions. Then I ran to the neighbor's house and knocked desperately on the door. I explained the situation as fast as I could and used their phone to call the police. I waited on the porch, praying that my wife would stay safe. When the police arrived, I ran to one of the officers and explained what was happening, trying to be as clear as possible. They stormed the house, but it was too late. The back door was open, and whoever had entered had already gone, taking several of our belongings with them. My wife was more shaken than I was, and for good reason. What she told me, and the police left me devastated, blaming myself for not doing more to protect her. I'll never forgive myself for leaving her alone in the house with them. She said that soon after I instructed her to hide, someone broke down the bedroom door. The person entered, cocked a gun, and stood there for a few seconds, clearly trying to hear if there was anyone in the room. She told me she had never felt so much fear in her life. I think the intruders heard the sound of the rocks I threw at the window. The most terrifying part is that we still live in that house, with no plans to move anytime soon. Sometimes I catch myself thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't gone outside for those brief moments. Since then, we've installed an advanced security system and cameras all around the property. But sometimes, when I wake up at night, I still can't shake the feeling that someone might be out there watching, waiting for another opportunity. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.